on this new episode of Let's Talk. I'm super happy to be here today with Piethein Strengholt. How are you doing, Piethein?
Yes, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing very great. I'm grateful for having you on the show, and I have many questions that I want to ask you. So I'm super excited about this episode. Maybe first of all, for the people who might not know you, could you introduce briefly yourself?
Yes, Piethein Strengholt. I currently work for Microsoft, the Netherlands. I'm there the Chief Data Officer. Look over many customers. I'm the counterpart of many Chief Data Officers or executive. I have many conversations on data strategy, data governance, data architecture. I'm author of the book Data Management at Scale. Last year, the second edition came out of that book. I blog post a lot on data architecture, data mesh. I think that's where most people know me from. And 3 years ago, I came from ABN AMRO, and over there, I also wrote my first book and implemented something there, what you could call also today a data mesh architecture.
That's a very impressive track record, to be honest. I'll jump right into it. Many things I would like to ask you about. As an author, your career, your work at Microsoft, your vision of data and AI in general, and much more. Maybe it could be very interesting if we could go back into your career and like maybe key moments for you that have helped you along the way to nowadays. So could you share maybe like some key important
Some
moments
key
to you?
parts. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
some
So I
insights.
think I started young as a child already interacting with computers during my
Okay.
childhood. So my first computer I bought, I think, was 12, 13 years old. At that time, somewhat later, I started working with Windows 95. During high school, I had my own company, small company, did a lot of network administration, server maintenance. Then, after informatics, I started at Accenture. First for 2 years, did several projects, mainly on system integration, system engineering. Then after some point, I went into consultancy, and there I stayed quite long, so for 12 years at Deloitte Consulting, many different projects. So the roles I had varied from project manager, coordination, bit of enterprise architecture, and at some point I started at a bank where
Mhm.
the main objective or the role I had was to coordinate the integration of a Basel II reporting chain using business intelligence software, Power BI, even and first version at that time, and SQL Server, and we had to build an Inman data warehouse. So that was the first time I really was dragged into a data management related role, and I was very passionate about that. And at that stage, I also started programming lots of SQL code. Um, I learned how important a good data model is, the performance, how to maximize the performance out of SQL Server, even at the time. And from there onwards, I started to do more data related roles. And then at some point, ABN AMRO, so the bank approached me, why don't you join the new data management team? And at that time, we had 30 people, 40 people working there. And from there, it went really fast because we came up with the transition plan for the bank, how to become much more data driven. And I think that was also the start of all the new work I did afterwards. So we developed a strategy how to move away from that big monolithical environment, a very large enterprise data warehouse ABN AMRO had, into more, how could many departments themselves use data at a larger scale. And I think that was a scenario or a transition very much you see these days. Other companies do similar to what is called data mesh type of architecture.
Mhm.
I did that, I think, for 5 or 6 years, and saw all the different stages. So the initial phase, more the maturing phase, and at the end, where architectural control and governance became much more important. And then after that, I joined Microsoft, carrying forward the knowledge from all of those years, and to help other customers also to scale in that respect.
Awesome, amazing. Now I'd like to ask you the question of your mission as of today. So you're CDO at Microsoft. Um, you're also an author and you have quite some reputation in the field around all those subjects, data modeling, data architectures, governance, and so on. So, what do you feel that your mission is today? What is your state of the art, if I can say?
Yeah.
Um,
Personally, for me, it's still learning. So it's a constant journey of learning, discovering, connecting the dots. Really, to me, growing my career, um, looking more at customers, helping them to succeed, coming to the nuances. There's no right or wrong, or it is not a binary choice. Often, it very much sits in the nuances. And the different trade-offs you should make as a company. And I try to help and guide organizations on that. Educating people, sharing my knowledge. So that's basically most of the work I currently do, which I very much enjoy. Absolutely.
awesome. All right, so I think now we have a clearer picture of different moments.
Hmm.
I'm very curious about if you can share a bit about the book that you wrote that was published in O'Reilly, and based on the overview of your entire career that you shared. At what point did you start the book? So could you share maybe like some insights, the key ideas behind
The
it,
key IDs.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and when did you started writing on it, and why?
Yeah, at ABN AMRO, I think there the ID originated. We used the data management book of knowledge from the Dama community quite a lot intensively there. But it's a very thick book and also very theoretical.
Hmm.
And in a way, I also felt a bit outdated looking at the work we did at that time at ABN AMRO. And already at ABN AMRO, I was giving lots of presentations on democratization of data management throughout the organization, domain orientation, data products, which at that time we used a different name for that, a golden data set. But and that resonated really well also with the participants of the presentations I did, and also externally. And people constantly ask me, "Well, where do you get that knowledge from?" And then at some point, so people said, "Well, why don't you write a book?" And I think after the 10th or maybe 20th person said that to me, I started really thinking about it and yeah, querying, looking around. And at some point, I reached out to O'Reilly, made a proposal, and I think there then the journey started. So the first book was mainly, I think, around the ideas developed internally within ABN AMRO, so with approval of my existing, so at the time, chief architect, chief data officer. He said, "Well, please go forward and don't be shy about the things we have developed internally." And then at some point, I joined Microsoft. Also, data mesh, I think, became way more popular, and that article was released in the final phase of writing, wrapping up that book. And I think there I found some interesting ideas also in there. And while working with many different customers, I also learned, well, there's no good or bad architecture. Also, other approaches work extremely well given the situation you're in. So I wanted to refresh the book based on the learnings I had with other customers, as well insights on data mesh and what other people say. And the first edition, honestly, by some people, it was perceived as a bit too conceptual. So I also wanted to take another shot at making it way more practical. So in the second edition, you find concrete architectural diagrams. I call out solutions. You see solution architectures showing really how to design such an architecture, which wasn't there in the first edition.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm curious about all the people that you've shared or met at conferences and so on. What are like the key things that you discuss in the book that people tends to get more wrong? So like best practices that you mentioned that you see in companies that are not well executed or not well understood. Do you have like one or two examples in mind that comes?
Oh, yeah, I think all of these transitions are massive, and predominantly it's about people, culture management, change management.
Hmm.
I think that what people I think underestimate. So they think, well, you plug in a bunch of technologies, and then suddenly you do data mesh, for instance, or you become data driven. No, it's way more different than that. Yeah, and I try to demystify, in my view, what data mesh is. So there's some misconception um, also on that within the industry, I feel, and it's, in my view, also way more nuanced than how things are advocated, maybe in the view Samak Degani, for instance, has in her book, or in the articles, or what you see across within the community. So yeah, that's the common thread with most customers. So either they ask me to share my experience on predominantly the culture management, people management, training, upskilling, the whole transformation, so that journey, or alternatively, so to demystify data mesh. So what is a domain or a data product, for instance? I see constant noise between my customers, between them, even within departments. So people say, well, this is a data product, but then between departments, even within organizations, you see there's misalignment. So I also help often in that respect.
Awesome, thank you. And that's a perfect transition because I would love to ask you about the role of CDO. So, from your perspective, what could we define the role of the CDO, and like what are the main skills and character traits that we can find in a great CDO from your perspective?
Hmm. Yeah, it's about leading change, communication, building bridges. The alignment with the business is critically important. At the end, they should buy your message, your strategy. It's strategic thinking. You need to be creative, um, good at leadership, people management. So there are many dimensions and aspects. And yes, you should have content as well. And I think that's sometimes, honestly, what I miss at some chief data officers. They see themselves more as, yeah, I execute what maybe others define, but yeah, I think at the end you should really drive it from yourself and what you believe in. And this requires you to develop a strategy of your own, of course, with your colleagues or people surrounding you. But you need to
Hmm.
have content.
Hmm. Awesome. I'll ask you further on the CDO role and
Mhm.
a lot of topics that you mentioned, but I'm very curious about the C level in companies. And so, how would, for example, the CDO best interact with other C levels? Like, have you grasped some insights on that through time in terms of like CDO versus CTO, CDO with CEO aligning with the strategy, vision of the company, and so on? Do you have insights for us?
Yeah, the CDO role is relatively new, and I see it sits often at different levels within organizations. So in
Mm.
some cases, it reports into the CFO, so the financial officer.
Hmm.
Then in those cases, I primarily see data is considered as a cost center. So that person constantly needs to defend well on the investments on data, and is the business case always there. So I often see that. Sometimes it reports into the chief technology officer. So then I feel or see, well, it's way more technology oriented. So very much then you see discussions on architecture, enterprise architecture, the movement to the cloud, DevOps way of
Mm.
working. So all these kind of aspects then are more predominantly being discussed. Sometimes, yeah, it stands more next to the CFO, CTO. Yeah, then yeah, it depends a bit, but then it's more the data governance, data literacy, the the enterprise data model, if that is needed, is developed there. The capabilities, so the execution sometimes happens elsewhere. Sometimes it sits below the um, yeah, COO or the execution officers. And then it's predominantly running programs, implementing use cases, doing the coordination. So yeah, it varies very much between
Mm.
organizations, and I think that's also what makes the CDO role for most CDOs also a dilemma.
Yeah.
How to do it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it feels like it's very unique based on each companies and the culture and so on. So it is hard to compare the same role from different perspectives. That being said, with all the people you've shared through time, I'm sure that you've seen plenty of better CDOs, and some other companies that might have strategies or like less mature, let's say. What are the common pitfalls that you can say in the the strategy of the data department in companies in general?
It's a big transition on multiple dimensions. And all of these dimensions should be developed, I think, more or less equally at the same time. And where I often see it falls apart or goes wrong, where lots of focus is being put on one dimension at a time. So, for instance, the CDO then very much focuses on data governance, data security. So, no data can be used without tons of controls being applied on that data. I think
Hmm.
that's not helpful when when the other capability, so the architecture is not mature, for instance, or you see predominantly the focus on building a damn good architecture. But then if people are not trained and skilled and there's no governance, I think then as well it falls apart. So where I see it goes well is where you take a slow pace of change and increase the maturity on all of the different dimensions, including so that people, culture, training, the architecture, governance, um, and more and the like. So that's where I see it goes well. And
Hmm.
some organizations they try to boil the ocean, so onboard all data at once without any consumption on the consuming side. Or sometimes I see we have the first phase of our architecture developed, then we bring in lots and tons of consumers or the entire organization, and then yeah, the team is not ready to deliver and to scale up to the level needed. So you see very disappointed users then at the end. So it's about yeah developing things in the right order and step by step. That's
Amazing. Um, all right. From here, I have a different path, but I think one thing that comes to mind directly is what are the main roles or areas when you lead the data department? Like, what are so what I have in mind is we know different roles in the data field. So we have data engineers, we have data governance, we have data scientists, ML ops, LLM ops, data architects, solutions architect, and so on. How do you go about having this overview, this big picture, and knowing where to invest and how to align these what you just mentioned, like this slow pace, growing every part while not trying to boil the ocean. Really like
mhm.
this metaphor. So how do you visualize it, and what are like the key assets to a great team for a data department?
Oh yeah, tough question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit bottom up and top down at the same time, I would say.
Mm,
So if you primarily focus on trying to map out conceptually all the things at the top and build your strategy, yeah, then yeah, there's no pragmatic, I think, experience then, and yeah, things at that point could also fall apart.
mm,
Just getting started and without a clear view in what direction you're heading towards, I feel is also not ideal. So it's a bit of both, and I think you should approach it from bottom up and top down, and reach each other somewhere likely in the middle. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but
yeah, yeah, it does. No, it's
and yeah, and
uh,
on these roles, yeah, you mentioned. I think that will also develop itself along the way, and it's not you should not carve it in stone. So be flexible, and maybe what works in the beginning won't work at maybe the second or third phase you're in. So you should be flexible and also open, adaptive to
mm,
change. It's a constant
mm,
journey of learning and gathering insights.
mm. Awesome. All right. So if I go more into the role itself, you mentioned key assets about the role. You mentioned different points that we could do to be great. I'm curious about like two different types of companies. So the first one would be like small companies or maybe startups that are launching, let's say, the data department. So, but like at a point where there will be a CDO or there is a CDO, but it's really the beginning, and compared to like big organizations, and by big I'm referring to like size of Microsoft, which like not many organizations are this size with this level of governance. But what would you give to both advice if you had like one room with only startups and like CDOs with this size? I would assume that this answer is hard because it really depends on the use
Yes.
case. But maybe you have some insights or things that you learned along the way of doing things. And the other room, which is like more like bigger corporations, like at scale, like your book refers.
Yeah, to me, it boils down. So what is your strategy? Strategy. What is your ambition? So what are you up to? And the willingness to invest on this, because things can become very expensive. So, and I
Mm.
think that that's equally for different sizes of companies. So you should have a plan and a strategy, and how you plan to use data at large, if you want to, at least.
Mm.
And then from there you should define a transition plan. So where are you currently at, and looking at all of these different dimensions we discussed. So what is the maturity when it comes to people, culture, and there often you see startups, they maybe on that aspect they have a much higher maturity
Mm-hmm.
compared to larger organizations. But maybe on the governance or the architectural side, there maybe at startups you see the maturity is less, and maybe at other larger organizations the maturity is higher. So try to
Mm-hmm.
determine for yourself. So what is, yeah, so baseline, and then from there you should transition. Look at the use cases, and then per use case I recommend, or set of use cases, build out the architecture. At the same time, implement a good governance, develop the architecture, mature the capabilities you need for using data at scale, and then, yeah, continue with that journey. And yeah, be open, adaptive to change, and maybe the strategy maybe over time changes itself. If you are exposed maybe during along that journey to any data leakage, yeah, the strategy maybe will look entirely different than maybe an organization who did not experience such a thing. So hope
All right.
this, yeah.
Yeah, no, it answers totally, and it is like tips for everyone. Those are like best practices. I understand. So one thing I'm curious, based on that, it's strategy. So when you manage very important budgets, I would assume you align with the C level um, team, and then you have to implement this strategy. I'm curious about managing team and scaling teams as well as systems. But how, like, do you have comments on how do you make sure that everyone is aligned? How do you have people report to you, or in general, do you have like best practices? Because I really like the fact that your book is data management at scale,
Hmm.
and it is correlated to like growing humans team at scale. So how do you see it? How deep do you get into like knowing each project that's going on? Do you have people who report to you? Can you share some insights maybe regarding that?
I think work in that respect maybe at other companies, or the experience I gained over the years. Yeah, it should, in my view, start with a clear strategy. So what is the direction you want to go into? I think that should be clearly communicated and spelled out throughout the organization. And so people
Mm,
should, in my view, ideally embrace that direction, and acknowledge the value of data, and managing data, and at some point also taking ownership.
mm,
If, and the organization isn't there yet, and people do not embrace or understand the strategy or direction, yeah, I
mm,
think you should in itself first work on that, and that could in some cases I see at some organizations take quite long. Again, sometimes you see it's approached top down. So executive team says, well, this is that direction we would like to go into. It's clearly communicated. Um, there's clear mandate also that comes from that team. But in other cases, I see no, it starts more with an idea and that needs to be evangelized throughout the organization. And then, for instance, it could take much longer till it reaches, I think, the higher top within the organization. And yeah, then you should start changing again. So on all of these different dimensions. And what I mostly see, there are some standard organization building blocks, I call them. So there's the infrastructure team, which is important, and they should provide the infrastructure services, allowing the data office or the data management team to build, design, and deliver high quality data management capabilities. Then I already said that, well, there's a data office or data management team. Sometimes the data platform team is part of that team. Sometimes I see those stand more apart from each other. So the
Hmm.
data governance or office team focuses a bit more, I think, on the vision, strategy, coordination,
Hmm.
communication, training, education, you name it. And the platform team has a clear, I think, focus more maturing, developing the data management capabilities. And then next
Hmm.
to that, well, there are, I think, business teams, business units consuming, using those capabilities to use data in that respect and turn it into data for themselves, either via reporting or with models or large language models, you name it. And in some cases, these teams act also as, I think, providers. So they own applications. Maybe they don't use that data that intensively for themselves, but maybe other teams rely very much on that data.
Hmm.
And in my view, well, the data office team also should, I think, act as the glue between all of these different teams. So they should oversee what teams need, require, what order, and they should do the coordination. And
Hmm.
then sometimes I see, well, there's this program that sits on over the top on all of these different organizational building blocks. So key members from those organizational building blocks, they participate virtually in that program, and that program oversees that the data strategy is executed upon accordingly. So what has been stated in there. So the use cases go in the right order. The capabilities needed for those use cases are also delivered in the right order. And this is a massive change for lots of organizations
Hmm.
and requires also tons of coordination between all of these different teams. So an example I saw at my previous organization, but also at other organizations, is sometimes we have these PII, planning integration sessions, where all of the Scrum teams, they come forward with their backlogs, including the data office team, which has a backlog of its own, the data platform team, the infrastructure team, all of the business teams with their use cases. And then the program oversees all of these different backlogs and try to align all of these items and epics within these backlogs to ensure consistency is being added in the way how all of these different things are being executed upon and delivered. And yeah, this is hell of a work at most organizations, and it's difficult as well. So it's not
Hmm.
easy to.
Hmm. Interesting. And following up on that, do you have find for yourself like the best strategies maybe to do this kind of follow up alignment based on like the backlogs of everyone to just make sure that everyone is aligned and it's compounding the overall value of the quality of data and the quality of the use cases, and there are no dependencies that are like making some other teams wait, let's say. Do you have like best practices or tips for yourself that you really like
Um,
to implement?
yeah, you need to have good leaders, I think, in that respect as well, who are willing, to oversee, connect the dots, but also step in. So when things go wrong, those leaders should be vocal. Also, I think about the order, willing to take ownership. Enterprise architects, in my view, play a crucial role, but they should also be seen as player coaches sometimes. So not from the sidelines, just yell and shout, but also willing to take ownership and maybe even in some cases join a team, maybe temporary, to help them to move forward. And then at some point, step out, zoom out, and yeah, play that leading role in coordinating different teams.
Hmm.
Another
Awesome.
model I sometimes see is what other organizations call is data heroes. So those who really thrive and make impact, they can become part of a hero network, and they can oversee and then help each other out and also contribute to that vision. And then you see this network is being created of data heroes between business units and the platform team, and yeah, in that way you build that community. Yeah. It's also a model I really like. But again, yeah, there I think it depends between organizations. So what might work at company A maybe might not work at company B. So yeah, you should also try and test out for yourself. And
Yeah,
there
makes
I
sense.
see, yeah, really nice different stories. Yeah, from many organizations, and sometimes they surprise me what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, well, regarding this, you mentioned leadership and leader. So I'm curious to ask you about what makes a great leader, and like not only a specific C role, but in general with your overall expertise. You've worked with many people in many teams. So what are the common traits that you really distinguish in between successful leaders?
Be vulnerable, transparent, open. Um, yeah, sometimes you need to be directive, prescriptive. I think it's also then in that respect finding the right balance between these things. Um, in a way, you should inspire people to also follow you. Communication, people management comes with that.
Hmm.
You should, I think, also invest in yeah the partners you work with. Um, so gain trust by building, investing in the personal relationship. It's many of the different yeah disciplines, but yeah, those are I think generic disciplines that also play a crucial role in life, right?
Yeah, yeah, and so you mentioned different interesting skills to work on. Some are a lot of them are soft skills. And may I ask what have helped you improve as a leader through time? Could you share maybe some insight that helped you personally overcome situations or feel that you've grown as a leader through time?
Yeah, I had the privilege to work closely also with the chief architect, chief data officer at the time at ABN AMRO, and watch him from a short distance. So that helped me personally grow in my career. At some point, I did some people management. I would not say I'm the best people manager maybe in the entire world, but at least it helped me a lot. I think I also learned a lot about myself in that phase. Now at Microsoft. I'm again learning from all of the different customers I work with, also the leadership team. I'm yeah much closer with her, so yeah, all of those different aspects help me. And yeah, there are different stages, maybe also in my career. So at some point, I invested way more heavy in maybe the depth and understanding data architecture, metadata management maybe for instance. In other cases I look way more how organizations organize themselves and try to skill myself by looking at those dimensions. So
Hmm. Awesome. I'm curious about. So I would like to ask you about Gen AI and AI in general. But before that, you mentioned something that I'm really curious about. So um, at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned that one of the traits, one of the aspect of the role of a CDO is to bridge different things, like to create bridge between areas, teams, and so on. Um, I would like to ask you about communication. How do you align with stakeholders that might not be technical, or like how do you translate? How do you change your vocabulary? How often do you do it? do you have insights on how important it is to align your dialogue based on who you're talking with or which client? Maybe you're talking with I'm inventing, correct me, but maybe
Mhm.
you're having a talk with a CEO of a big company, and maybe then you'll have more like with a CTO or with a CDO, and like different roles that have different background, that have experienced different things. So do you feel that do you adapt frequently your communication based on
Absolutely.
who you
Yeah.
have in front? And can you share maybe some insights
Some
of how
insights.
does it look like?
Yeah, I invest time in talking to the people surrounding those other people then I talk to, and yeah, what is the common concern or the challenges, or how could I trigger an interesting conversation, and also is what is the level of depth maybe that person could reach. So could I go very deep into maybe the grounding process of LLM? Well, if it's the CEO, probably not. So I would then rather stay a bit more high level, and maybe in that respect discuss, so what is the business strategy and how could AI foster and help and support the business strategy maybe overall in that respect. So yes, it very much depends.
Hmm. Yeah. And following on bridging gaps, what are the main bridges that you find yourself building? This is a I'm curious about, based on all the clients that you've had through time, what are the main gaps? Or we kind of tackled this question before, but maybe you have further insights on what your clients are doing and what you are most um, helping with in terms of those bridges.
Yeah, so maybe on the AI subject today, I think it's predominantly knowledge or the fear of the unknown. So yeah, then the way I build bridges these days on this subject is by explaining basically really how a neural network works and how these models are trained, and on top, what does Microsoft do in that respect to make it really responsible, and how the security maybe from an infrastructure point of view works. And by addressing the unknown, people become enthusiastic, and they slowly start to get their head around, so what is AI really, and what are the yeah what are the techniques behind AI, and how do these different things then work and correlate. And by addressing that, I see some acceptance, and then we have a, I think, a mutual I think good conversation then on next. So now there's openness and there's trust. How could we now look next at use cases, for instance, or what does it take from the organization to embrace AI, or how to get started, and what is essential maybe in the early stage of adoption of AI, and how would maybe the next phase look like.
Hmm.
Um, in other cases, um, it's in a way also very much about listening. So those customers approach you not because they like you, but they have a concern or problem, or there's a reason. So learning them better and understanding the situation they are in also helps me to gain trust and build that bridge and the relationship. And then once we double checked on the current state and the problem statement, then we can together, so with that customer or client, work on finding, so what is the solution then for that problem they have, and that differs also mostly between organizations. So it's also a lot about listening.
Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, and I can imagine. So I think one entire episode could be dedicated to how to evaluate the maturity of clients and like how to do
Absolutely, yeah.
this overall process. Um, but I will switch directly to AI with your experience. So AI is not new, obviously. We have like traditional machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning, and so on. Now we have seen surge of Gen AI and like use cases with large language models. Sorry. What is your perspective on the evolution of AI through time based on the maturity of the companies?
For now, for me, it's really hard to say and guess. I think we're now in a new phase, really, and it's hard to give any expectations or projections towards the future. It's we're such at a tremendous pace of change at these times. Hopefully,
Hmm.
maybe things
And
will calm down after a few years. But
yeah, and if we look at the past, like maybe the last 5 years, like have you like what kind of changes have you noticed? Do you feel that uh, clients are way more mature and can and try to do more advanced use cases, or like have you seen a shift in the value that clients are trying to get with AI and technology in general?
I think it's the ease of adoption these days. So maybe in the past, so let me give an example. So with machine learning, I think data quality is critically important. You need to validate those data sets and refresh them and build a high quality data pipeline with controls on top of it and deploy the models and the whole ops part. I think now with generative AI, that I feel is way different because these models are trained really for months, and then yeah, we have a very broad, generic, high quality model which we can immediately implement and link to use cases. So you see now even organizations with maybe yeah way less maturity, they are capable of yeah leveraging the potential from generative AI because I think there's less knowledge maybe in that respect, or less, I think, surrounding activities, like I mentioned before, required to yeah, bring a nice use case to life.
Hmm.
That what makes it
Makes
different.
sense.
On the other hand, yeah, it's a complex subject, so
Hmm.
yeah, you should grasp at least so the basics. And what is a large language model, for instance, and how does it differ from a traditional machine learning model? And
Hmm.
that's where I see some organizations, customers, they are a bit confused. So yeah, again, that brings me back to that conversation of trading, educating those organizations, and explaining clearly the differences.
Right.
How do see you
Awesome.
that? Maybe a question.
What? Sorry.
Maybe a question to you. How do you you talk to a lot of, I think, other experts in the
Oh.
field?
Well, that's I wasn't expecting to being asked this question back. Um, well, personally, I feel that once we don't need background in traditional ML to implement Gen AI use cases, and I think once we've played a lot with large language models, the easiest one are like OpenAI's models. We can really get an intuition of what those things can do, and if we have some basics on computer science, programming, and so on, we can really start playing with them and see the overall value. And I really like the fact that it can really help manage content. But overall, yeah, I think I still need to put a bit more reps in the episodes and sharing with
Mm.
experts to have a better better vision on this subject. Maybe one of the last questions that I'd like to ask you is following on this topic, the partnership with OpenAI. So um, I would be curious to talk about enterprise data, which is how does Microsoft make sure that when clients are using OpenAI's model, let's say in the infrastructure of Microsoft or with Microsoft services, how do they make sure that their data is not being shared with clients,
Yeah,
with OpenAI? Sorry.
yeah, it's a very good question because I get this question a lot. So what is OpenAI and what is Microsoft Azure OpenAI, for instance, and
Hmm.
how do these two differ from each other? Well,
Hmm.
OpenAI is the foundation. So the company that has the IP and develops these large language models, for instance.
Hmm.
They provide these large language models also themselves with open public services. Now, also these days, they have private services, but imagine the open services. Well, you then establish a relationship not with Microsoft but with OpenAI. So that foundation, so that company, and they guarantee the security. And yeah, we know also learning from the past that some of that data was also used for training these models. So we at Microsoft, so we work different. So we work closely with that company. We use these large language models that were trained by OpenAI, and we embed them securely in our infrastructure, and we offer them as services towards our customers. And customers can do different things than with these large language models. For instance, we integrate in our services. So either they can use co-pilots,
Hmm.
and those co-pilots we manage. So Microsoft 365, Teams, and Word and Office. So all now these days have co-pilots. And those services are highly secure, and we guarantee via SLA. So we do not violate the agreements we made with customers. So we do not use their local data for training our models. The data we store it within the tenant of the customer securely, and it's not exposed and shared with or mixed with data from other customers. So customers own their data in their tenant, and that's highly secure. The Azure OpenAI service allows customers to build and develop their own co-pilots. So you can integrate or embed a large language model, for instance, in your own application if you like. The services are highly secure. So again, it's data you own. That data is managed within securely your tenant. We have private endpoint integration. So the integration between services, maybe within the Microsoft infrastructure, is highly secure. And that this is unlike the OpenAI services we provide. But we closely work together with the foundation. Microsoft did some significant investments, contributions also in that foundation, and we use these large language models, the inside the IP, also throughout our services. Hope this clarifies. Yes.
Definitely,
Okay. Cool.
definitely
Yeah.
clarifies. Maybe my last question to you would be, and this is a hard one, but like ethics and regulation in general, like how do you take that into consideration, and like what are maybe some uh, pitfalls or things you're currently looking at around these topics as at the CDO of Microsoft?
Oh, yeah. This is a very complex subject, and sometimes, yeah, I with colleagues can talk about hours for this.
Hmm.
Yeah, in short, so I'm part of in the Netherlands a virtual team, and we also have a virtual responsible AI community. So we as Microsoft find it
Mhm.
very important. You do this well. So within that community internally, we share the learnings, insight, also the insight Microsoft gained over the years while developing and implementing these models ourselves. These insights we also share. So these best practices we share with customers. But in addition, yeah, we also have frameworks. We have good guidance. We train customers also on this subject. At the end, I also would like to stress out it's a joint responsibility. So yes, we have a fundamental and important role to play to educate our customers to develop the services in such a way you can control these in order to do it securely and responsibly. But on the other hand, customers, they should also be aware of the trade-offs they make internally. So for instance, I tell my customer, is it wise to use personal data or personal information in these large language models today? Well, you should make yourself a trade-off in that respect. So it's a joint
Awesome.
responsibility.
Hmm. Understood. All right. Well, maybe last question that I have for you is a message for the Let's Talk AI community. So, if everyone, for everyone who is still here with us on the podcast, thanks a lot for listening. I'll ask you this last question. If you like this episode, feel free to let us know in the comments. If you have any questions, also, if you enjoyed it, you can like it and subscribe. My last question, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show and taking this time, is what would be the message for the Let's Talk AI community? And by that, it can be anything personal, professional, tips, career tips, something that you're really passionate about. You decide.
Be open, adaptive to change. It's a continuous journey of learning and learning. So I love learning, and I did that my entire career. And I encourage the listeners also from this podcast to do the same. So be open and adaptive to change.
Amazing. Thanks a lot again, and I wish you to have an amazing day.
Thank you.